What's up, everybody? The first weekend of March Madness has officially come to a close, and we are now down to just 16 teams who can win the 2025 NCAA tournament. And in today's video, we're going to be making our predictions for the upcoming Sweet 16 matchups all the way to the national championship game. If you've been enjoying all the March Madness content, make sure to drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, and let's jump into it. All right, we are here on ESPN filling out our second chance bracket for the 2025 NCAA tournament, and the first Sweet 16 matchup we're going to be talking about the Auburn Tigers versus the Michigan Wolverines, the 1-5 matchup in the South. Auburn winning their last two games over Alabama State and Creighton. Alabama State, Auburn, a little shaky start, but then ended up winning by 20 points and then took care of business against Creighton, specifically in the second half, avoided their three-point barrage that was going on in the first one. This team has looked solid overall. Johni Broome hasn't done anything too crazy, but you have Tahad Pettiford playing at a really high level, as well as Chad Baker-Mazara. Miles Kelly is shooting the ball extremely well, and then the bigs are playing great defense. Won both of their games by double digits so far, and then taking on a Michigan team that had a hard game the first round against UC San Diego, with UC San Diego having a three to tie it at the end, but just missing, and then went on to defeat Texas A&M 91-79 in their round of 32 matchup. I think this would be a really good game between the two. I'm interested to see how Johni Broome plays against the likes of two 7-footers with Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf on the Michigan side of things, but at the end of the day, I do think the Auburn Tigers just have a little too much, are going to overwhelm Michigan. This is also going to be an interesting game with storylines, as Trey Donaldson, the point guard for Michigan, who's been playing really good recently, has hit a lot of clutch shots for the Wolverines in both of their last two games. He used to play for Auburn, so that is going to be a fun storyline to match up with, but I do think Auburn's going to take this one, so give me the Tigers to advance in that matchup. Then in the next one, we have Ole Miss taking on Michigan State. Ole Miss upsetting Iowa State in the round of 32, going up against Tom Izzo and the Spartans, and I think this could actually be one of the closest matchups that we see in the Sweet 16. Ole Miss has been playing great so far this tournament. Beat North Carolina in their first round matchup, and honestly, it was a convincing win, even though the final score tells you a little different, as North Carolina came back there at the end, and then beat Iowa State by a large margin in their second round matchup, taking on a Michigan State team that has pretty much controlled both of their games as well, beat Bryant as well as New Mexico in their last matchup. I think, again, this could be one of the closest matchups that we see. Ole Miss, you got Dia, you got Brakefield, you got Sean Padula there at the point guard spot. That has been incredible. Michigan State, Cohen Carr has been a very bright spot for this team. We all know he's one of the most athletic players in the nation, but he has been scoring the ball extremely well for Michigan State. Jaden Akins shooting the ball decent. And then you also have Holloman, Jace Richardson, and Jeremy Fears there for this team. I think, again, this is going to be a very close matchup, but I'm going to give it to Tom Izzo and the Michigan State Spartans to advance and face Auburn in the Elite Eight. Then we'll jump down to the West region, where we see Florida taking on Maryland. Florida having a tough-fought game against UConn in their round of 32 matchup. Honestly, Walter Clayton really stepped up for this team at the end and hit clutch threes time and time again, taking on a Maryland team which had the most exciting game of the tournament so far there against Colorado State in their second round matchup. Colorado State hitting a three with just 6 seconds left on the clock to take the lead over Maryland. And then Derek Queen hitting the jump shot at the buzzer to send the Terrapins to the Sweet 16. Kevin Willard and the Crab Five have been an awesome story so far in college basketball this season, but they're going up against Todd Golden and the Florida Gators that have so much talent on their end. When we look at these teams, starting five versus starting five, I do think Florida has the slight edge, but it's pretty close. But the bench is really going to be the difference maker in this one to me. The depth that Florida has is one of the best in the country compared to a Maryland team that heavily relies on their starters. I predicted that Maryland would get through their first two games, but I thought in the Sweet 16, this might be where we start seeing the fatigue to set in. And so I'm going to be picking Florida to get past Maryland in this one, but I don't think the Terrapins go down without a fight. Then in our next Sweet 16 matchup, we have the 3-seeded Texas Tech taking on the 10-seed Arkansas. Arkansas being the only double-digit seed that has made it to the Sweet 16 this year. In a year where we don't really have any Cinderella stories to talk about, Arkansas seems to be the one and only team that is a bit of a surprise to make it to the Sweet 16, but Coach Cal has this team playing great, beat Kansas in their first round matchup, and then upset the 2 seed St. John's and Rick Pitino in their second round matchup. This Arkansas team, don't forget, has some of the best talent in the nation. They were a top 20 team preseason, just going off of who Coach Cal had on that roster, but obviously got off to a slow start, specifically in SEC play, but has been coming on as of late. And they're taking on a Texas Tech team that just beat Drake in the round of 32 to advance to the Sweet 16. Also beat UNC Wilmington in their first round matchup. JT Toppin has been looking really good for this team. Kerwin Walton is shooting the lights out of the ball. You got Elijah Hawkins there at the point guard position, as well as Darian Williams and a few other pieces that this Texas Tech team has. I've loved how the Red Raiders have played so far, and I think they're going to play spoiler to the Arkansas Razorbacks, making it all the way to the Elite Eight. So I'm going to be picking Grant McCasland and the Red Raiders to advance and face Florida in the Elite Eight. Jumping over to the Midwest region, we have the Houston Cougars taking on the Purdue Boilermakers. Houston just coming off of a big win against Gonzaga in a game where it seemed like they had control for the majority of it, but Gonzaga did make a late run, but Houston was able to hold off the Zags and advance to the Sweet 16, taking on a Purdue team that just came off of a win against McNeese in a game where they just absolutely obliterated the Cowboys. I think out of these two teams, Houston is really the only one that has had any sort of challenge in the tournament so far, with Purdue having 2 pretty easy matchups to get to the Sweet 16. LJ Cryer has been playing like maybe the best player in the tournament so far, just absolutely torching the Zags in that second round matchup. You also have Milos Uzan that's been looking good. Jawan Roberts has been a load down there in the paint for the Cougars, along with all of their other pieces, taking on a Purdue team that relies heavily on Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Wren. They've been shooting the ball pretty well from three-point range, but I think Houston's a lot better from deep. Also, Purdue has not played a team that's going to get up and pressure them like Houston. When McNeese got up and pressured Purdue in their last matchup, Purdue did have some issues with it, and I can only imagine what Houston's going to bring at the Boilermakers. So I'm going to be picking Kelvin Sampson and Purdue to advance into the Elite Eight. And then we have Kentucky taking on Tennessee in a 2 versus 3 seed matchup and a rematch from the SEC regular season. In the regular season, we saw Kentucky beat Tennessee both times, so I'm interested to see if Mark Pope and the Wildcats can win for a 3rd straight time against the Volunteers. So far for the Wildcats, they've been looking really good, beating Troy in their first round matchup and then handling Illinois in their second round matchup. Kobe Brea and Otega Owe have been scoring the ball at a very high clip. Amari Williams grabbing a lot of boards. I like what I've been seeing from this Kentucky Wildcat team so far in the tournament. Then taking on Rick Barnes and the Tennessee Volunteers. Chaz Lanier has been looking like one of the best scorers in the entire tournament. You also have Zakai Ziegler that has been dishing the ball and scoring pretty well. Also, Jordan Gainey looks to be a bright spot for the Volunteers. And then you also have Meshack playing lockdown defense. I think this is going to be a really close battle, but at the end of the day, I think it comes down to who can get some stops between these two teams. And Tennessee definitely has the better defense between the two. So I'm going to be picking Rick Barnes and the Volunteers to advance to the Elite Eight, where they'll be facing Houston. And then jumping up to the East region, we see Duke taking on Arizona in our first Sweet 16 matchup in the region. Duke and Arizona played earlier this year at Arizona, where Duke came out with the victory. I think it might be a lot of the same in this one. Cooper Flagg and the Duke Blue Devils have looked absolutely dominant in their first 2 games so far. Really haven't had any contest. Just beat Baylor down, shooting the ball extremely well from 3, did the same in their first round matchup. And honestly, it reminds me a lot of what UConn did last year, just absolutely dominating their opponents each and every game. Going up against an Arizona team that just barely beat Oregon in the last game of the round of 32. It was a close one, but it's one where we saw Caleb Love absolutely dominated down the stretch, scoring 10 straight points for the Wildcats at one point. You also had Jaden Bradley playing really well for Arizona, and Del Orso was hitting some clutch free throws for them. Arizona has a lot of talent on this team, but going up against a Duke Blue Devils team that I think has a little more talent. Also, the thing that scares me a bit was Arizona had an 8-point lead with only a few minutes to go and just made some bad mistakes down the stretch to let Oregon get back into it and almost steal the win. So I'm going to be trusting John Shire and the Duke Blue Devils just a little more than Tommy Lloyd and the Wildcats. And I like the Blue Devils to advance into the Elite Eight. And they'll be taking on either BYU or Alabama in a battle of who has the best offense, because both of these teams can absolutely score. I think this game might be a first one to 90, maybe even 100 type game with the pace that both of these teams play at. Richie Saunders and Igor Dimon for BYU have been incredible. They also have Keita down low that has been a load to defend going up against this Alabama team. It has Grant Nelson back from injury. He's been playing good. Mark Sears showing why he's an All-American in the sport of college basketball, alongside a lot of other key pieces for Alabama. In my original predictions, I had Alabama advancing to the Elite Eight in this matchup, and I think I'm going to stick with the same. I love the way that this Alabama team has been scoring. Although the defense can be shaky at sometimes, I'm just going to trust Nate Oates and the Crimson Tide to get it done in this one and advance to the Elite Eight. And we'll go ahead and jump into our Elite Eight picks and run back the other way. So our first matchup we'll be talking about is Duke versus Alabama, the 1 and 2 seeds out of the East. Alabama, as I just mentioned, just an offensive juggernaut, can score with the best of them, going up against a Duke team that also has a very good offense, but one of the best defenses in the country as well. This team is also one of the biggest teams in the country. I think that could give Alabama some fits. The fast-paced offense, I don't think is going to stress Duke out at all, where they like to get out on the break, and that's when Cooper Flagg shines the most. Also, if Alabama wants to get in a three-point battle with this Duke team, if you've been watching what Tyrese Proctor has been doing, it's been absolutely incredible. He's been the first person for Duke since 2010 to have back-to-back games with 5+ threes, and in his last matchup, went 7 for 8. The dude is not missing. To go along with a guy like Cooper Flagg, when you need a bucket in tough moments, he can go and get you one. Con Knipple has been pretty good, but we haven't even seen the best of him. Same with Kamal Malawach and Sion James. This team just has a lot of weapons, and I don't think Alabama's going to be able to stick with him. Also, with the way that they're playing, it's hard to pick against the Duke Blue Devils right now. So give me Duke to advance to the Final Four. Moving down to the Midwest region, where we see Houston taking on Tennessee, another 1 and 2 matchup, but we've seen a lot of chalk in this tournament, and I just don't see a reason why to get away from it now. Houston, another 1 seed that has been absolutely dominant in the regular season, but also in the tournament, taking on Tennessee, who they've been pretty dominant as well. Handled Wofford in their first round matchup, handled UCLA in their second round matchup. I really like the defensive matchup that we're going to see between these two teams. And so for this one, I think who can score more? We've seen Houston come out and score a lot of points, but honestly, that Tennessee offense has improved as well. So I do think it would be a really close matchup. I like the front court that the Houston Cougars have just a little more than what Tennessee has. Jawan Roberts has been playing great. You also have Tugler in the starting lineup alongside him, and then Francis coming off the bench. Arsenault has been a really big piece for this Houston Cougars team so far in the tournament. I think he can step up as well. And then, as I mentioned, LJ Cryer has been playing like maybe the best player in the entire NCAA tournament so far. Milos Uzan, I think he's going to have a big game. And then you can't forget about Emmanuel Sharp. That dude can get hot at any point, and I just think this Houston Cougars team is going to have enough to get past Tennessee and advance to the Final Four, where they'll be taking on the Duke Blue Devils. Then moving over to the West region, we get the 1 seed Florida taking on the 3 seed Texas Tech. And this would be a great game. JT Toppin, one of the best players in the Big 12, taking on Walter Clayton, one of the best players in the SEC. And this is another matchup where we're going to see a lot of points scored, in my opinion. The one thing about this Texas Tech team that does concern me a bit in this matchup is they're slightly undersized, and although Florida is not the biggest team, they do have some really big pieces down there in the front court that are great shot blockers and great defenders. Also, Florida able to switch out and kind of guard 1 through 5 with just about anybody, it seems. I've had Florida going far for a while in most of my brackets, and I don't see why I should turn away just yet. So I'm going to be picking the Gators to advance. And so far, we have 3 1 seeds in the Final Four. And moving on to our last Elite 8 matchup, we have the Auburn Tigers taking on Michigan State in another 1 versus 2 matchup. The top teams in the NCAA tournament have been absolutely dominant so far. They were dominant in the regular season. And honestly, the metrics kind of showed why it has been so chalk. These teams are just really good up here in the top portion of the sport. And so again, we got another 1 versus 2 matchup. Auburn taking on the defensive-minded Michigan State. I really like this matchup. I think it could go either way. Obviously, you got Tom Izzo and March, one of the best coaches there. Bruce Pearl bringing the Tigers all the way back after a past couple of seasons of being disappointed in the NCAA tournament. I think the key piece in this one is actually going to be Tahad Pettiford. This freshman has not been talked about like a lot of other freshmen in the country. Maybe it's because he's not in the starting lineup like some of these other ones, but he has had just as good of a season in my opinion. He's been a very key piece for this Auburn Tigers team. Also, this is a matchup where we might see Janiah Broome go off. I think the front court that Auburn has is night and day better than who Michigan State has. I do like Kohler, I do like Cooper, but when you compare those to Janiah Broome, Dylan Cardwell, and Chaney Johnson, I really think Auburn needs to focus on playing through their bigs in this one, and if they do, I think Auburn's going to get the win. So I'm going to be picking the Tigers to advance to the Final Four, where I know it's an all-chalk 1-seed Final Four, but with the way these teams are playing, I just can't get away from it. And with the way that the tournament has been going so far, we shouldn't be surprised. So in our first Final Four matchup, we see Auburn taking on Florida, a rematch from the SEC. In the last matchup, Florida got Auburn. We have the regular season champions and the Auburn Tigers taking on the SEC tournament champions and the Florida Gators. And man, what a matchup would this be in San Antonio, and one that I think a lot of people would really enjoy seeing. We have two All-Americans in Walter Clayton for Florida and Janiah Broome for the Auburn Tigers, and two very experienced teams as well. I think this matchup would be a pretty high-scoring game, but also both teams have played very good in the NCAA tournament so far, especially for Auburn, who had lost 3 out of 4 coming into the tournament. And then you got Florida, which looked like maybe the most dominant team coming into the tournament as well. To be completely honest, I think this game would only be decided by a few points, but right now I'm still going to be trusting the Florida Gators and what they've done so far and what they continue to do. That win against UConn was very impressive, and I think this team has their sights set on that national title. So give me the Florida Gators to advance to the national championship game, while they'll be taking on either Duke or Houston, and this would be another great matchup. You have the experience with the Houston Cougars taking on the youth and the freshmen there for the Duke Blue Devils. Houston, one of the best defenses in the country with an improved offense, would be pretty scary for this Duke Blue Devils team to go up against, but Duke is also one of the best offenses and defenses in the country. I do think the Duke size and length might hurt the Houston Cougars just a little bit. Also, I think Duke is just a little bit deeper than what Houston is right now. You got Caleb Foster, you got Mason Gillis, you got Gongba, you got Malik Brown if he's back from injury at this point. And even if he's not, this team is so deep and has so much talent. I just think it's going to be too much for the Houston Cougars to overcome. So I'm going to be picking the Duke Blue Devils to advance to the national title game and take on Florida. And to be honest, this is the matchup I want to see. I think these are the two best teams in college basketball right now, with some of the best stars in college basketball. If this game were to happen, I think we'd be seeing both teams scoring at least 80 points. These offenses are incredible, and both defenses are good as well. But with the way these teams have been scoring recently, it's been extremely impressive. But to be honest, the one thing I keep coming back to in all of these matchups is just who is going to be guarding Cooper Flagg. He has had a great tournament so far coming back from injury, and I think with every game he just keeps leveling up, and I don't see why he couldn't have one of his best games in his collegiate career in this one. And because of that, I'm going to be picking the Duke Blue Devils to be winning the national title in this one, and Cooper Flagg to become a national champion in his one and only season in college basketball. Let me know in the comments what you think of the predictions, and who do you have in your Final Four? Also, make sure to join the Basketball Network's Second Chance Bracket Challenge. The link will be in the description of this video. And if you've been enjoying the content, make sure to drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.